Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 74th episode of Retuning Your Firm. I know we've always got new people on each week, so what's Retuning Your Firm? Well, it's about taking stock. It's about when you've got that time out, how you're going to use it sensibly. And today, I think, will be an interesting opportunity for us collectively to do that. We're going to look at a very key issue around performance. I think it should have the words under before that, so underperformance. We're going to be looking at the role of the non-exec director and where can they really add value. And then we're going to then look into the future. What are some plausible scenarios? What are some things that will actually maybe not happen, but we should be prepared for them possibly. And then having heard from Rohit, we'll then, as a group, because both Jeremy and Nicola are themselves sort of well-seasoned non-exec directors. That's probably a good term. And so we'll try and kick those ideas around and think about how we might encourage the executive team at the firms that you work with, and obviously many in the audience today, to actually see this as being an issue that's really important rather than just on the list of things that maybe happen one day, but who knows. So that's a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today. I'd like to introduce Jeremy Horner. Now, Jeremy is a non-exec director and also a business coach. His background was he worked in I'm never quite sure whether to call it engineering or quantity surveying. I think it was kind of the build world, is something that we call it in America. And he rose to a very senior position in a major firm. And then having sort of seen the opportunity to do life, to move in a different direction, is now a non-exec director and business coach, as I mentioned. So welcome, Jeremy, and looking forward to your thoughts on the whole area of underperformance and why is underperformance tolerated. Our second guest today, our second panelist, is Nicola Sawford. Nicola Sawford has done many things in her life. I'm sure she could tell you all about them, but I think the one that probably when she first came to my attention, I suppose, was when she was the chief executive of Cell Court, which is a very well-known firm of barristers. And being the chief executive of a group of sole traders is a very interesting, bit like being surrounded by permanent non-execs, I suspect. And anyway, she did that for a number of years and then has now moved into a number of very interesting non-exec chair roles, one currently to do with Milton Keynes, but also was very involved with the bar. I think it's not the Bar Council, it was the one that bar registration, the one that deals with regulatory issues anyway. Probably got that bit wrong. Anyway, what's she talking about? Well, she's talking about where can NEDs bring most value. And what's interesting, I think, is increasingly firms, particularly law firms, are now seeing merit in hiring NEDs. Now, okay, the word director may not apply in an LLP because it's a partnership, but leaving that aside, actually having somebody on that board who can bring that independent perspective and ask the awkward questions and at the same time help management be successful. It's that important mix, I think, is really valuable. So really looking forward to what Nicola has to say. Our third presenter, Rohit Talwar. I think he, according to his bio, he's done several thousand keynote presentations around aspects of the future, scenarios, helping people think about the future, but not just any old futures. They've got to be plausible. They've got to be ones that are capable of happening. And any board, I'm sure, will tell you that you've got to be able to hold 2 or 3 alternative plausible scenarios in order to really start making the best of that particular way of thinking. So what's he going to be talking about today? Well, he's going to be talking about plausible scenarios for a post-pandemic future. And he hasn't actually told me exactly which ones he's coming up with, so that's fun. But what I've said is that we are looking very much at people issues at the moment being top of the agenda for the board, and possibly the more tech innovation area being therefore put slightly to one side. Now, given that the competitors in other industries haven't stayed still, totally in the development of AI and the rest, is that a sensible approach? Who knows? But I'm sure we'll get into that. And then once we've heard from Rohit, we'll move into the panel session and talk a bit about some of the ideas he's come up with. And then Jeremy and Nicola can bounce them around and see how we think we might then move them forward in all of 20 minutes, which I suspect is probably a bit unrealistic, but never mind. Okay, cool. So I'm Richard Chaplin. I'm the founder and chief executive of the Managing Partners Forum, and it's my great pleasure to be your host today. So before we move on to the poll section, let's just run through a bit of forum news, because that's always quite good to hear. If you're not watching the videos from these past shows, hundreds and hundreds of people are every month. I mean, and some of them go back quite a long time. We've got over 2 years of fantastic videos, a couple of hundred now, all about 5 minutes, so really easy. And we also got every single edition of the show, if you really want to spend a happy 50 minutes watching that. Our unlisted peer group video, a lot of people watching that. It's unlisted, but if you're interested to know our peer groups, then Claire would love to hear from you. It's very much, we're finding people who are sort of in the managing partner elect role, or people who are actually sort of newly appointed, really find a peer group helpful, because at the end of the day, it's asking an awkward question to a group of intelligent people is not something that goes down very well, I think. The Mentor Match program continues to thrive, where sort of 70% of the people who've signed up as mentees have now been matched, which is pretty amazing. And it's a very interesting, helpful place to help you, keep you in track every aspect of the mentoring relationship. And we held the summit on Wednesday. That was really interesting. We actually had a mock board looking at the whole issue around what's the deal between the board and its people, and then using a series of templates on Miro where they were actually all working together. And it was a bit scary, I think, for some people. I think a lot of people kind of felt, oh, we really want to rush to a conclusion. But that's actually, design thinking isn't really about rushing to a conclusion. It's about coming up with some ideas, then going back and finding out, testing them, if you like, finding out actually there's a bit more information that changes the idea. So you're kind of oscillating between sort of future and the present and data, if you like. And the one thing you don't focus on is process, which of course for most professional people is where they love to be. So quite a scary place, but it worked really well. And the videos will be up in a few days, so do watch those as well. So what else do we want to chat about? Let's move on to feedback and polls. And as you probably know, we get some amazing feedback from UK government. You can read there your polls, incredibly valuable analysis during these dynamic times. So let's just look back at the property poll that we did 2 weeks ago now. And I compared it with one we ran, the same poll, on the 12th of Feb 2021. Leased offices are expected to remain the default property option. 90% plus people are going to go into the traditional leased offices. Lots of interesting variations emerged during the pandemic, don't seem to have necessarily stayed the course. What was the biggest change since 2021? I think it was to do with the time that people expected to people in the office post-pandemic. So currently, from what the survey was saying, around 50% of people are commuting to the office less than 3 days a week. And I mean the office to client premises, sorry, I should be a bit clearer than that. Now, go back a year or so ago, the expectation during COVID was that that number would be about 30%. So people were expecting more people to get back to the office. Now, that may be timing, it may be moving. I know PwC was saying the other day that they're up to 70%, and they're very happy with that. But it was previously 95 to 100% at the office and clients. So again, things have definitely changed there. What about benefits? Well, the key benefits remained pretty much the same. The relaxed dress code, wellness programs, mentoring, health screening. I think the big difference really was that more firms are now providing these benefits compared with pre-COVID. They've almost become like de rigueur if you want to encourage people back to the office. And what are actually firms doing to sustain their corporate culture? Well, it's kind of, again, the usual set, I guess. So hopefully management, regular updates, social events beginning to come back quite strongly, lunch and learn. So you're actually not just eating, but actually learning at the same time, and volunteering. They were the four that really came through quite strongly as being the ones that people were actually focused on. Was some people talked a bit about tech and new tech programs and getting buy-in through tech. We had a good session from Devyani about that 2 weeks ago on video, but it's still really very much same old, same old. So again, we might want to come back to that. So what does that look like? Well, there's a couple of slides here. They're not very high res, so you'll forgive, but the traditional leased office over to the right, 84% in 2021, 82% in 2022, for all practical purposes, no change. All the others, things like co-working desk, team rotation, shared space, really not getting much of a mention. And then this one, which was really picking up the point around how much time people are spending, and the red was 2021 and the blue was 2022, and more than 3 days a week was up at the top and less than 2 days a week was at the bottom. And you can kind of see a movement between red and blue. So back in red, which was 2021, it was closer to 3 days a week, 56% saying 3 days a week. That dropped to 30% in terms of what people are now happening. So I think people are kind of expecting things to go back to normal a bit quicker than maybe they have, but who knows, maybe it is a new normal, or just maybe it's just new, who knows. So let's talk about today's poll. Today's poll is on an anonymous one, as usual, I hasten to add, underperformance. And this poll we did, I think, about 18 months ago, something like that. So what are we looking at today? We're going to ask you to ask some questions. Well, firstly, what are some metrics that are using to assess partner director performance? Where I put partner, you can read the word director, essentially the same thing. Frequency of performance reviews, how much time you're spending on review. Are there any trends in terms of reducing senior headcount? What are your targets you're setting for underperformance? How many have you got? Why do you think they're there? What are some of the options for dealing with them? And to what extent are you following best and arguably worst underperformance practices? And hopefully this will be of interest to Jeremy, who I know has been thinking about this topic for a number of years and sees it as a very key element of management's contribution to the business, is to grasp and not to tolerate underperformance, if you like. So what's this telling us? Let's have a look today at what's today's poll all about. Okay, the first question was, which are the three most excuse me, important metrics used by your firm to assess partner director performance? And the one that's come out by a long way is the first one, personal revenues around hours, realizations, utilizations, recovery. So the focus is personal. And then falling way back a little bit behind that, you've got three together: team profitability, nice to see teams coming in, feedback from other partners, and revenues from originated clients. So those are things that appear to be the most important metrics. Second question, how often does your firm undertake formal partner directors reviews? And 25% never. That's an interesting statistic. The balance annually, which won't surprise you. How much time does the reviewer or reviewing group spend on the formal appraisal per partner or director? That's about less than 3 hours for 3/4 of you. Don't know how much you can do in less than 3 hours, but never mind. Which is the most common? Which of the following trends is most common? There's no real obvious one jumping out from this list. I would say probably none of the above is 3/4 on the list. The ones that come down, slimming down the partner group, director group, and people finding it difficult to change gear at the same speed as the firm are the two things that probably are the most common trends. But some firms say none of those apply. A realistic target for the proportion of underperforming partners at a typical partnership. This is not yours, this is a typical one. And the biggest there, well, about half and half. Half of you say 1 to 5%, and the other 6 to 10%. Now that's quite, only 17% none. That's quite a big proportion. What about your own firm? Oh, this is getting interesting. Actually, it's worse. Your own firm, being honest, because it's anonymous, 6 to 10%, with nearly 10% if you're saying 10 to 15%. So there's a lot of underperformance going on there. Interesting. Jeremy, I'm sure, will have views on that. Why? What are the three most common causes? Again, let's just flick through. There's nothing really jumping out at that one. None of them scoring more than about 40%, but personal problems comes through, fear of failure, trying something new, loss of a recent client, poor time or project management. So it's kind of a spread, really. I think there's no sort of what I call really, these are the three most common, obviously, therefore ranking. So I'm not saying the others aren't happening, but these are the ones that are obviously jumping to the top of the list for you. The most popular options for dealing with underperforming people. Again, there's no obvious sort of magic bullet here. The two that come through highest are reinvigorating moderate performers and voluntary and negotiated departures. Nobody's getting expelled. I suppose that's a relief. Incremental performance improvement comes through next, together with development and training. So it's kind of a spread, really. There's no great sort of pattern there that I can determine. Which of the statements are true for your firm? And there's a number of statements which you obviously will have all seen, but which were the ones that came through? Well, there were six. The one that came through most strongest was that our partners have got clear targets for chargeable hours and all sorts of other good things. That was 2/3 of you. And then scrolling back, constant standards and the baseline criteria you expect people to achieve is nearly at the same level. Those are the two that come through strongest. Some people, a few of you, consider de-equitizing or redeploying, but that's kind of like expulsion is seen a bit extreme, I suspect. Interestingly, possibly, there's nobody taking personal responsibility for an underperforming partner, or at least only 17% of you that's the case. And that's an area that, again, I think is an interesting one to explore, because if nobody's actually focused on it, what measures gets done and all the rest, so it may not happen. And then the last one, which is true for your firm, and these are all not very brilliant things, but the one that comes through, let's flick through. The one that comes through strongest is that at our firm, underperformers are not confronted in a spirit of openness and candor. We kind of shuffle around and don't really kind of say things. That's the one that comes through highest on that list. And the other one that comes through next is probably over promotion, that partners and directors being over promoted. So I shall stop sharing now, because I think there's been lots of juicy stuff there. Thank you very much all to completing it. As I said, it was done about 18 months ago, so it'll be interesting to see whether the pandemic has changed any of those things, but I suspect a lot of them are going to be cultural, sadly, but there you go. So if I may now, I will remove Spotlight and I will invite Jeremy to come and share his thoughts on why firms tolerate underperformance. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you for your earlier introduction, and thank you for having me on your show. Some really interesting immediate feedback. Cultural, I think, is at the heart of it. So I look forward to seeing that feedback in a bit more detail. So good morning, everyone. Over the next 5 minutes, I'm going to talk about why so many firms tolerate underperformance. By which I mean that mediocre so-so performance that deserves a tick in the doesn't meet expectations box of the annual appraisal, but doesn't often get one. So why do we tolerate underperformance? The other day, someone was describing their team to me and concluded by saying, and then of course we have the two underperformers. When I asked what the plan was to deal with it, it was clear that there wasn't one. So this morning, I'd like to challenge you to stiffen your sinews and find the resolve to deal with those cases of underperformance of which you're fully aware, but have not yet done anything about. And what's your reward for doing this? I would argue that it can be nothing less than the transformation of the performance of your firm. And here's why. I remember a senior partner telling me at the start of my career that of the partnership, of the 100 or so partners in the firm, there were probably 10 who moved the dial, who made a good firm a great firm. And in the many firms that I've worked with since, I would say that observation still holds true. So it follows that we need to keep our high performers motivated. And for the most part, we do this by tinkering around with their remuneration, bonuses, profit shares. And of course, that's important. But have you ever known any high performer to be really happy with their pay? No, I haven't either. And this brings me to the point about tolerating underperformance. One of the key insights in Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, is that there's not a great deal that management can do to motivate high performers. They're already hugely self-motivated, but there is one thing that management can do to demotivate them, and that is to tolerate underperformers. High performers hate it. They can't stand it. It's quite simply unfair. And if it's not dealt with, it'll drive them away. And yet time and time again, management teams are not prepared to deal with it. Why is that? Well, here's one explanation. One of the refrains I often hear when I challenge boards on this is, we don't want to lose what makes us special. We're not that sort of firm. We're a nice firm. So I guess the challenge is, how do nice firms drive higher performance? And I'm going to suggest 3 steps. The first step is mind your language. Don't conflate a reluctance to address underperformance with being nice or being kind. Being nice is an approach designed to make you feel better. It's like saying, I will do the nice thing and not point out what the other person has done negatively. Similarly, being kind is an approach designed to make the other person feel better. It's saying, I will do the kind thing and assume that the other person did not intend to do something negative. So I'll say that it's okay, or that they shouldn't worry about it. Being nice or being kind often results in every HR director's nightmare when they're presented with an underperformer's annual appraisal that says they meet expectations, or worse, that they've been given a pay increase or a bonus. So instead of being nice or being kind, I would advocate being compassionate. And compassion is an approach designed to stop further suffering. It's saying, I will do the compassionate thing and have what could be a difficult conversation, but constructive conversation to ensure that any negative consequences are not allowed to continue. Step 2 is train your leaders and your managers in how to have compassionate conversations. They can indeed be difficult, but if they're done well, they can be incredibly constructive. And thirdly, and we picked up some of this from the poll just now, get the basics right. At the risk of stating the obvious, be clear with your people what performance you're expecting. I remember the first performance meeting I was ever in with a partner. His first response was, I didn't realize this is what you wanted from me. So be fair, set out clearly what good performance looks like. And build accountability into your leadership structure. Part of the problem here is that it can be difficult to challenge the performance of an equal, particularly in smaller firms where leadership and structure is less formalized. So leaders need to be given a clear mandate to manage performance. And ideally, it's the senior partner or the managing partner, but sometimes it can be the non-exec director who calls it out. But there must be somebody responsible for holding people to account. That's my 5 minutes. I hope you feel inspired to have that compassionate conversation. And think of it this way, you'll be motivating your high performers. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Jeremy. And I think words of wisdom, and I can tell you've been in a number of compassionate conversations yourself. I would now like to invite Nicola Sawford to come and share her thoughts. And if I mentioned before, she's a non-exec chair, director, advisor, and trustee, and probably does all of them at the same time, I suspect, too. And I've asked her to talk to us a bit today about where NEDs can bring most value. Over to you, Nicola.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the invitation, Richard. Richard's asked me to contribute to the session on boards by talking about where a non-executive director can add most value. And to provide a little bit of background, I've been a NED for 10 years, and at present I sit on 4 boards, 2 of which I chair. And I will mention one of them specifically, which is Milton Keynes Development Partnership, which I'm incredibly proud today. I don't know whether you heard the news, but Milton Keynes has actually just received city status. So well done, Milton Keynes. So I'm not sure who's in the audience today and your level of experience with NEDs. So I've tried to make this useful for those of you whose organisations already have boards with NEDs, maybe addressing one of those obvious questions you always wanted to ask, as well as those of you thinking about adding NEDs to your board, or even those thinking about becoming a NED themselves. It's probably worth stating up front, tempting as some of these might sound, with what NEDs shouldn't be there to do. And I've highlighted 3 areas. So starting with the old-fashioned view on what NEDs did, say, 20 years ago, they aren't there to add grandeur and gravitas or a few gongs to your board in exchange for tea and biscuits. Neither are they there to opine on their lengthy experience and what they've achieved in their careers. Secondly, some companies see them as a cheap and easy way to get free consultancy or the little black book of contacts. There's a limit to how much consultancy you're going to get for your 20 days a year, and you're much better using dedicated experts if you need that advice. Similarly, the little black book may look great on paper, but they quite often remain closed and are rarely as useful as people hope. Finally, and there's a clue in the name, they're not executives. They're not there to run a business or to tell the executive what to do. So if we take a brief look at the board's responsibilities, this helps point towards where the NED can add most value. These include culture, strategy, performance, risk, remuneration, and assurance. So this is a professional role with real responsibilities and liabilities. So turning to the skills. The skills a NED can bring are many and diverse. NEDs should ideally be all-rounders, bringing a number of different skills. The specifics will depend on the size of the board and what the other board members bring. Some of the fundamental skills that all NEDs should bring include governance, finance understanding, business experience, strategic and analytical skills. Next, they should bring experience and knowledge. And again, I'll split this into those 3 categories. So firstly, industry sector knowledge and experience. For example, a former managing partner or CEO in a professional services firm, or maybe a C-suite executive from a sector you specialise in. They bring lived experience of the issues you're facing. They understand them and they may have solutions. Secondly, you want specific types of business experience that may come from a different sector. You may be looking for someone who's led a business through a pivot or growth phase, expanded overseas, undertaken a digital transformation, or successfully IPO'd a business. They will already have invented that wheel and can help you avoid the common pitfalls. Thirdly, specific professional skills. For example, finance, remuneration, risk, digital, and these days things like ESG, DEI as well. You'll still need those consultants, but a NED with these skills will make sure the board is asking the right questions at the right time. On top of all this, and I think most crucially, NEDs should bring a whole host of personal attributes. These are essential to ensure they're really adding value as a NED. Now, depending on which book, article, or job specification you read, these could include, and this isn't an exhaustive list, independent, interesting, interested, well-rounded, intelligent, supportive, challenging, objective, passionate, curious. If you find all of these in one individual, you've probably found someone superhuman. But continuing with my theme of threes, these are the three that I'd pick out of there. Firstly, a curious and inquiring approach. Your NED should want to spend time understanding the business and the environment it operates in, not just reading the papers the day before the board meeting. And a curious NED will identify and grasp the issues to help the board and the executive evaluate those solutions. Secondly, independence. I think Richard mentioned this back in the introduction. It's key as it enables NEDs to challenge and question decisions because they are independent of the day-to-day running of the business. And this helps them to be objective. It doesn't mean they should be dispassionate. In fact, the opposite. They need to care, to have the best interests of the business as their motivation. Applied well, independence is a potent blend of objectivity and passion. And finally, they need buckets of EQ, particularly the chair. A term quite often applied to NEDs is that they're a critical friend. And achieving that balance is really important. They need to be team players. The board and executive need to be able to work together and sometimes have really difficult conversations, similar to the conversations that Jeremy was referring to in Underperformance, without it becoming a conflict situation. They need to be self-aware and they need to be able to exercise judgment of what to say and when. Get the right mix of NEDs with a real breadth of experience and skills, and they will help your business thrive whatever unknown unknowns the world chooses to throw at you. I feel that's probably a perfect introduction for Rohit. So back to you, Richard.
Indeed, an uncertain world and whatever the world throws at you. I think that's interesting. But of course, are you actually always the passive person in that space? I think Rohit would probably argue, and we'll see for a minute, that actually you can explore alternative scenarios and look at what they actually mean for your business. What would happen to our strategy if this particular scenario were to happen, and how can we possibly prepare for that? So I think it's a bit more than waiting for Godot, but I'll leave Rohit to take us through that in much more detail. Rohit, as I mentioned before, Chief Exec of Fast Future, and I've asked him today to come and give us a few, not too many hopefully, but a few plausible scenarios, and then we'll go into a panel session with Jeremy and Nicola and me, obviously, but just to kind of explore some of those scenarios in a bit depth and what they really might mean for professional boards, of which obviously Nicola and Jeremy both sit on for professional services firms. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Richard. And yeah, I think people have probably heard me talk about scenarios a few times. So I want to take a slightly different tack on this, which is to say that when we think about the scenarios that might lie ahead in the next 3 years, there are a few key factors that shape those. Obviously, the economy. Secondly, the rate of digital transformation, the impact of digital transformation. Thirdly, geopolitical uncertainty. Then there's the issue of our people and our customers' behaviors and what their expectations are. But what's really interesting to me is when you look across all of the potential scenarios, you see this really interesting balance between, or tension between, on the one hand, organizations fearing that they're facing an existential risk. And this is one of the things we hear more and more from boards and the non-execs are you geared up to deal with existential risk? And on the other hand, the scale of change, the speed of change, and the emergence of new sectors and the impacts of what technology can create for us we have this tension, as I say, between existential risk and exponential growth opportunities. And there are so many scenarios that could play out that I think we need to take a step back from trying to work out the scenarios and think about what are those no regrets things we can do that would work under any scenario. And the first is making sure we've got a plan B, that as well as our current growth plan, we are thinking about what would we do if there was a 5 or 10% turn down in the economy or in our markets? How would we respond? Let's have that plan ready. But equally, what would we do to drive exponential growth, or to grow and double the business within 4 years? A lot of people are happy with whatever their growth number was, 5, 10, 15%. But now we're starting to see organizations say, what if we give ourselves permission to look at doubling the firm's size in 3, 4, 5 years? How does that force new thinking? And how does that get our people performing differently? The next, I think, and this is something we're hearing a lot from non-execs again, and one of the clients I work with, their board is really hot on this. They're using different language, but it's about what is the body language of the firm? What is the body language of the firm to the marketplace? Do we show that we're open? Are we showing that we can partner them in whatever direction we're going in? And examples would be when our customers were a bank and our customers start talking about crypto. How are we reacting? Are we trying to help them understand it? Or are we saying we'll close their account if they try and use crypto, we'll ban them? If we're a professional services firm, how are we responding when our customers say they're setting up a presence in the metaverse, or they're setting up an AI team, or they're going after a rapid acceleration of investment and looking at investing in 110 firms this year in a portfolio approach where they're handing responsibility to junior staff to drive those investments? How are we as a professional service firm responding to that? What is our body language when we have those conversations? Are we excited by that and saying, well, here's how we can help you? Or do we naturally move into a kind of defensive posture and a risk posture? And the next one then, and the body language is also internally. If someone has ideas in our firm, whatever we say the culture is, how do we respond? If someone spots an opportunity to do things differently inside the firm and volunteers to lead that initiative, what happens? What happens next? Is the body language one that encourages that, or basically leaves people to think, I won't do that, I'll wait till I'm told, or I'll wait until someone sets up a project to do X? And the two final ones. One is with the pace of technological change, we're all realizing that many of the systems that we operate within are running out of steam, whether it's healthcare, education, the financial system, the design of our businesses. They were born typically late 40s to mid 80s was the models that we work with. We tried to fit the new world into those models, but we're seeing them creaking now. And the challenge now, and the reason why a lot of digital transformation efforts don't succeed, is because it's just impossible to fit them into the existing organization. So one of the things we see non-execs doing more and more, and organizations being asked to do by their leadership teams, is to say, what if we were starting again? What if we took a clean sheet of paper and we were to redesign this business, starting with the data and the technology? How would we redesign around that in the same way as new entrants do? And then the final piece, and the others have touched on this, is foresight. We often say that non-execs are there to do the challenge around the future. But who is really charged, whether it's internally within the firm or within the non-execs, with that explicit remit of being a pain in the backside, of constantly challenging us to look at things that we're not putting attention on, having that radar that's looking out, surfacing the things that we really don't want to hear because they challenge our core assumptions, and we're hoping that those won't be challenged. And the problem is that hope isn't a very good strategy. And so those for me would be the key ones. Not worrying too much about individual scenarios, but saying, what is our capacity to drive our thinking around dealing with existential risk or exponential growth? How would we handle both and be able to hold both in our heads? The second is the organizational body language. really challenging ourselves to say, how open are we externally and internally? The third is this ability to design for technology, to really start again and think about what is it we would do as a thought exercise maybe, but also as a challenge to the way we do business. And the final one is, what is our mechanism for bringing foresight in? Who's charged with the responsibility for doing that? And how do we train our leaders inside the firm to use foresight, rather than say, that was a fun afternoon where we talked about the future, and then the managing partner stands up and says something really helpful, now back to the real world, or now back to practical matters, which is a great way of killing off the conversation you've just had. So with that, I think that's my 5 minutes, and I'll hand it back to you, Richard.
Thank you very much, Rohit. And that was some really great ideas. The idea of having a plan B, the idea of the body language, whether out to your clients or internally in terms of people responding to new ideas, the idea of coming up with a clean sheet because the institutions are now creaking. And then lastly, making sure there is a channel, if you like, by which these foresights can be actually brought to the board's attention. So Jeremy, which of those would you like to pick up and start with?
Well, I was really interested in the point about body language. I think that's a really fresh way of talking about how a firm presents itself, and it goes to the heart of the culture of the firm, and the way it does respond to to ideas, to innovation. Exactly as you said. Is it excited? Is it thinking about possibilities? Is it presenting new options? Or is it defensive and trying to persuade the client back to the previous way of thinking? So I think that's a really good challenge for boards, and for teams within organizations to think about themselves. And, it's almost always the case in my experience that where you have a high performing team within an enterprise, the body language of that high performing team is always more energetic. There's always more creativity. There's always more permission to be a little more dynamic, to be a little more daring. So I think that's a nice expression that management teams can use to just re-energize the way teams think about themselves.
Fantastic. Nicola, just sort of again, I've kind of one of the areas that I've always been interested in is what I call women on boards. In other words, how we've seen a very significant change in the landscape between those who are boards which is gender balanced and those that aren't. And I'm just picking up Rohit's point around the mechanism and foresight, and he was almost talking about what's sometimes called the contrarian non-exec director. Now, everything I've read suggests that if it's just one sole woman on a board, it doesn't have the same impact as if there's two or more. So what's your experience in that area?
Thanks, Richard. Yes, or as Rohit put it, the pain in the backside, Ned. I just have to say, I found all that absolutely fascinating. And in fact, all of the points Rohit made, they're so pertinent, aren't they, to Ned's, because they all come back to those points about what the board and the Ned are for, around culture, risk, strategy, and performance. But sorry, so back to the specific one that you asked me. I mean, I think maybe I've been very fortunate in my Ned career that I haven't been the sole female, but I have quite often found myself feeling, using the Greek the Greek reference, sometimes being the Cassandra. And it is really important for Neds that you are confident enough in your position and in working in that team on the board that you do call out these things. And I think one of the things that with a board, though, it's not just doing it to be critical, it's being able to call out those issues. So take at the moment, that challenge that we all have, the rate of CPI and the impact that's having on the business, and just how as a board you are actually managing that. And the thing for the Ned and the board to do is not just to stand there going, oh my God, it's a disaster, what are you doing about it? But it's to really help the board with mechanisms to work through that. And I think what I liked was where Rohit referred to the tension around risk and reward. And it's for the board to help the executive with mechanisms to really think about that, whether that be stress testing, running scenarios, really considering trade-offs. And I think as a Ned, that's where you're really bringing that value to that conversation.
Thanks. Rohit, can I just go back to your first point when you talked about Plan B, and which is an expression lots of people use, and I think lots of people probably mean it slightly different things for different people. But what sort of granularity would you think a board needs to focus on in terms of that Plan B, or is that totally contextual? You're mute, I think.
I think it's partly contextual, but it's also taking that big picture view, and particularly in professional services right now, we see that a lot of professional services firms are experiencing incredible growth. Their clients are in a dash for growth, they're in a dash for transformation, and it's all looking great. But the reality is, if those don't deliver, then the turndown could happen very fast, because all those clients start to cut their budgets very quickly. They cancel programs. And that's why we have to, as non-execs, be pushing to say, on the one hand, let's have that really ambitious growth plan so we can capture opportunity and grow quickly. But on the other, let's be doing that thinking around something that's almost unthinkable, a 10 to 15% decline in the size of our market. And the great thing is, we had that. Many firms experienced that in 2020. So it's no longer off the table. Or even to ask a more challenging one that says, what if the size of our market dipped 50%, or our business collapsed 50%? What would we do? And let's not wait till we get there, because we've already had a dress rehearsal for that. What would we do? And there's so much uncertainty that I think now the real value of non-execs in this is to really challenge the executive team to say, how much are you thinking about this? We fill our organizations with so many plans and projects, so many initiatives, that we almost don't give ourselves permission to do that deeper thinking. And I think that's something that, if we're trying to advise our clients, we ought to be taking the same medicine inside our own firms and saying what we do if. And certainly, yeah, that's what we're seeing with a lot of firms right now, is just that start of the process of thinking big in both directions, how we deal with existential risk and how we deal with the pursuit of exponential growth. Funnily enough, a lot of the ideas are the same in both camps.
Indeed so. Jeremy, just come back to you for a sec. Really picking that idea of extremes almost, because Rohit was talking about maybe your revenues drop 50%. And I know at the start of the pandemic, a lot of firms were predicting their revenues were going to drop 30%. And in the reality, actually, they grew because clients kept on instructing them and paying them, because there was money flushing around from government. What sort of range would you, as a non-exec director, be talking to some of the boards that you work with? I mean, how extreme do those scenarios have to be to get their attention, do you find?
Well, I think, I will always think back to not the pandemic, but the crash of 2009, 2010. As you said in your introduction, I worked in a sector in the built environment, and a turnover fell 40% in 12 months. That was the best part of 100 million. That was absolutely devastating. But also, it was something that the business could deal with. So, I think there are lots of real world examples where we can point to, events which have just completely changed the game, which have presented existential threats. But I think at the moment, the problem is that people are just making so much money, much to their surprise, that it would really take some convincing to come up with a Cassandra strategy. I mean, I think it would be seen as a bit of an intellectual exercise rather than some serious planning. I think there's certainly unease and there's uncertainty out there, but it would be difficult, I think, to get a board's attention, particularly in professional services, that you're looking at a real, sort of a real collapse of revenue. But my experience is that professional services firms, particularly partnerships, are incredibly skillful and agile in being able to tailor their costs and their revenue. Because of that personal accountability that equity partners have for the business, they are able to take action as quickly as it needs to be taken. So I'm hugely confident that most professional service firms can deal with it. I'm less confident that they can actually invest in some upfront time thinking about how they might deal with it.
Thanks very much, Jeremy. Nicola, just picking up Milton Keynes for a minute, and apart from congratulating Milton Keynes on being a city, what would you say are the things that you've obviously worked within professional services, still do, and you're obviously running an organization like Milton Keynes partnership, which is fundamentally different type of organization. Are there any sort of lessons that you kind of see comparing the two that might be worth sharing with the audience today?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Sorry, I was still thinking about Jeremy and the perfect storm for professional services firms. So that was an aside. Fundamentally, certainly from a NED perspective, they're not terribly different. It does come back to all of those points that, in fact, all three of us have made. That really, as a NED, you are absolutely there to make sure that your organisation has the right strategy in place, that it's implementing that strategy, that it has the culture in place to do that, it's aware of all of those risks, and that it's managing the situation and managing the performance. I mean, I think it's interesting talking about the that perfect storm, and we've all been referencing, obviously, what's happened during the pandemic, but also what's happening now at the moment as well with the global situation. And I think that's where maybe bringing something from one of my other boards to Milton Keynes, that we've really, really been focusing on those points that I was saying around that stress testing and really understanding not just what one of those changes can do, but that whole suite of changes and what it really takes to break an organisation. It's something, interestingly, that actually you probably wouldn't expect this, but in the housing world, it's something they're incredibly good at, because it's something the regulator makes them do every single year. Whenever they submit all of their information, they have to be able to show what different combination of factors will break the firm. So to Jeremy's point, yes, it might not break the firm full stop, but it certainly might break some of the partners' profit expectations. And it's understanding what combination of things and how you as a NED can help them think through how realistic that might actually be. And so, it may feel like it's way off on that far horizon, but when you combine them, it's really a little bit closer than you thought.
Fantastic. Well, now we're going to go to sort of gallery mode. Just like ask each of you to just kind of say, starting off with Jeremy, what's the insight that you picked up from today's session? Just one.
Well, I think, for me, it would be the body language. I'm going to take that away. That's the pearl that's been cast in front of me. I like that as a way of provoking new thinking from teams that might be a little too complacent for their own good.
Fantastic. Rohit, what's your takeaway from today? You're mute.
It's a combination of points that I guess we've all made, but Jeremy and Nicola in particular are around, we tend to look for boards for the kind of hard input, but actually that emotional intelligence and bringing that sensitivity to bear around what are we doing with our people and how are we really supporting our people through, whether it's underperforming partners through to junior staff coming into the firm, what environment are we creating for them to feel like their potential is being maximised?
Right. Nicola, only a few seconds left. Sorry about that.
I know, don't worry. So I'm going with Jeremy's compassion and with Rohit's plan B.
Fabulous. Well, look, on that happy note, can I just say that I've certainly found this a fascinating session. We didn't talk about creating a clean sheet. I think that's just too big a topic, because where do you start? You start off with the United Nations, given the current impasse there, or where do you begin? So let's leave that one. But thank you for that forethought as well, Rohit. So I'd like to thank Jeremy very much for talking about underperformance and reminding us that it's all about compassion rather than being nice. I'd like to thank Nicola for reminding us that actually other sectors have to do pretty impressive stress stuff, and therefore it isn't that difficult to do as long as you get your mind around how to do it. And I'd like to thank Ro for giving us something that was actually in a way very, very helpful, which is a framework that we can think through in order to make sure that our firm is best equipped to deal with whatever the uncertain future throws at us. And on which happy note, thank you all as a great audience. We're not back in 2 weeks' time because of the Diamond Jubilee, or Platinum Jubilee, sorry. So in a month's time, we'll be back with Retuning, and hopefully see you then. Bye for now.